Novell wasn't in the KSTP story. Ultimately, they decided to black out his photo. They took some steps, I think, that they would say to make the story not be about Novell. Though some of the emails that have since come out raise questions about that. But one of the things that Mr. Hubbard said was that they reached out through you to try and talk to Novell. And you guys declined that interview on his behalf. Is that true? And could you speak to your thought process in declining that?
Yeah, I can be very deliberate, and I think we've been pretty public about this, but this email to the mayor's office was forwarded to me, and with the caveat sort of, hey, want to have this on your radar screen, we don't know what this is about. Simultaneously, I got an email from Jay Cowles. This was the day before the day of the piece that said, it was not related to Novell. It asked, in a very short one-sentence ask, Mr. Newby, where do you get your funding? How much funding do you get specifically from the city of Minneapolis or the state of Minnesota? To which I responded and was happy to respond, none. We're a 501c4 organization, so we get $0 from any municipal or state agency or federal agency. Wonderful was the reply from Jay Cowles. That's all I needed. I'll let you know if I need any more help. There was then a text message exchange where he asked, can I talk to Novell directly? To which I then responded after I had read the email, and it was very clear to me that something was off about the framing, not a chance. I want people to understand it's in the context of they did ask me for Novell's phone number, but it was after I was very well aware of the fact that this was clearly a hit piece. We didn't know what type, but we knew it was a hit piece at that point.
Okay. One of the things, so I work in digital journalism primarily, and one of the things we talk about a lot and wonder about a lot is social media representative of public opinion? And whether you accept that it is or it isn't, is there a point, Deshaun, when you look at the reaction on social media and think there may be something there that we're not seeing?
Well, certainly, and I would hope it wouldn't even take social media. It could take a phone call from someone just articulating how that story reads from where they're sitting, whatever corner they're planted on, right? So in my mind, it isn't about the fact that Jon Stewart tried to shame KSTP. It isn't about The Onion. It isn't about people outside of our community weighing in. It's about the fact that the people who we're all as journalists supposed to be serving, informing, enlightening, a sizable number of them looked at that and said, you know, this is not what we expected. It's not what we deserve from you. And I think you have to listen to them. I trust me, we are not a perfect organization. I am not a perfect person. You know, I've had a lot of difficult conversations with people about the quality of our coverage, specific things that they think we should have done differently. Sometimes I agree. Oftentimes I don't. I'm always respectful. I listen. I try to articulate what our positions are, but I don't come into it thinking we couldn't possibly have done anything wrong here. And this was not a breaking news story where something was done in the heat of the moment. This was an enterprise we had spent several days on. So there was a lot of time for a lot of smart people to say, hey, does something about this just feel kind of fun to you? And even for us, when there have been stories that we've run that weren't done like on turn of a dime, if someone's upon its running said to us, gee, you know, running this that way, this image or this lead or this headline or this element of the story, you know, really struck me in this way, we'll have that conversation. Ideally, we're having that conversation internally before it runs, but we don't always catch that stuff. And you have to be able, I think it's a credibility issue and a respect issue, to take that feedback and have it shape both your reactions to the story that's being discussed at the moment, but also have it shape the way you conduct business going forward. It should be something that they are, and that's in some respects the bigger concern, is I have no sense that they wouldn't do the exact same story again.
Deshaun, let me broaden this issue out a little bit, because one of the things that I think is important to remember is that there are questions, I think, that we should ask about journalism broadly that come up from this story. And one of them is about diversity. Diversity in journalism in the Twin Cities, diversity in journalism in general. You're on the board of the National Association of Black Journalists. Do you think more diverse newsrooms, not just KSTP, but more diverse newsrooms across the Twin Cities, across the country, would change the narrative around stories like this?
I think it would likely improve the quality of journalism for a whole host of stories, not just stories like this. And diversity is a tough issue. If you roll back 40 years ago, there weren't that many people who lived here, who were born here, who looked like me, right? And so most of the journalists of color you see working at local newspapers, television, radio stations, most of us are transplants. Many of the white folks are too, for that matter. But the vast majority of people of color working in journalism here are transplants. And it's significant because it means you have to put extra effort into persuading people that they're going to make a life here and make a career here. But that's work that we should be doing, right? And once you have those folks within your room, within your organization, you have to treat them in a way that makes them feel that their voice matters and keep them engaged and growing, and hopefully over time giving them more responsibility to help them be among the folks who are driving what news is what we say it is, right? In my news organization, news is what the journalists in the room decide it is. What gets covered, what doesn't get covered, how it gets covered, that's the words, it's the image, it's the framing, it's what we say it is. And the same is true for every other news outlet in town. So who you have in the room matters greatly. And it can't just be, well, we've got a couple of black guys, or we have a couple of Asians, or a couple of Latinos. It's also what role do they play in your organization. And it's not easy. I'll tell you, recruiting to the Twin Cities at times can be a challenge, especially when it falls below 10 degrees. But that's not an excuse. It's just, if it's harder work, then you do it. You spend more time on it, right? You put more effort into it. I always jokingly say, I think it is actually harder being black. So what's that mean? You work harder. So if it's harder being an organization trying to recruit people from other parts of the country to persuade them to live here and work here, and it just is, it is. I'm the recruiter for the newsroom. Then you don't whine about the fact that it's harder. You do it. And then once you get them in the room, you work with them to help them grow and take steps so they can help you do a better job of practicing journalism in this community.
Anthony, I'm going to turn this question around on you from the opposite perspective. But before I do, I want to welcome Jane Kirtley to the panel. As I mentioned, was just going to be here a few minutes late. We'll ask some questions for Jane after I ask Anthony this follow-up questions, and then